Paul looked down at the hand that had known pain, then up to the Reverend Mother. The sound of her voice had contained a difference then from any other voice in his experience. The words were outlined in brilliance. There was an edge to them. He felt that any question he might ask her would bring an answer that could lift him out of his flesh world into something greater. "Why do you test for humans?" he asked. "To set you free." Free? Once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a man's mind," Paul quoted. "Right out of the Butlerian Jihad and the Orange Catholic Bible," she said. But what the OC Bible should have said is, "Thou shalt not make a machine to counterfeit a human mind." So across social media, there is a rallying cry. When a new story breaks about the horrific use of AI by those in power, or even just in society, people cry out for the Butlerian Jihad. You see this across Twitter, you see this across Blue Sky, and for those of us who are Dune fans, you know what they're referencing. Now, in today's video, I want to talk about the Butlerian Jihad, and I want to talk about why Dune was right about AI, kind of. And we're going to read parts of Dune, we're going to read parts of several Dune books, actually, we're going to read interviews with Frank Herbert, and I want to talk about some of the latest horror stories we've been seeing with AI, and talk about that in relation to, do we need a Butlerian Jihad in real life? Because in short, what that is the complete destruction of AI and most computer systems. I think most people are obviously saying it in relation to destroying AI. And actually, if you are only a fan of the HBO Dune show and the Dune movies, which are set in the same universe, it actually means something completely different. So I am a big Dune fan. I've read the 6 Dune books. I read them in like 9 months. I made a whole video on my second channel reviewing them if you want more Dune content from me. But basically what the Butlerian Jihad is in the Frank Herbert Dune books is pretty much different than what it is in the Brian Herbert books, which influenced the show. So in the Brian Herbert books, what the Butlerian Jihad is a war led by the people who would become House Carino, which is the family that all the emperors are in. They lead this war against AI, which has essentially become like Skynet from Terminator. I don't actually consider this the Butlerian Jihad. In terms of some backstory for the show, I don't really mind, but I actually don't want to talk about that at all today, because I don't consider the Brian Herbert books relevant, and I don't consider them canon. And like I said, as a vague backstory to a show based on his other books, I don't really care, but we're not talking about that today. We're talking about the original Dune's messaging on things like AI. And of course, the original Dune books were written in the 1960s, and the last one came out in either 1985 or 1986 before Frank Herbert actually passed away. And just to say, this video is just like a pure passion video for me. I don't really care how it does. I just really wanted to make it. And it's been in my like video ideas list for the longest time. And I'm really happy I'm going to be able to share my thoughts with you today. Slight spoiler warning. I'm not going to spoil Dune Messiah, don't worry. Like, I don't even have the ebook, so I couldn't screenshot parts of Dune Messiah. If you are so sensitive to spoilers, you don't want to hear about potentially new characters in terms of maybe some characters you've seen in the movies have children, maybe skip the Dune part of this video, but I'm not going to spoil the plot of Dune Messiah or anything like that, so don't worry about that type of thing. But before we go any further, I just want to shout out again, my girlfriend is running a half marathon and raising money for medical aid for Palestinians. That is happening this week, so please, if you haven't already, consider giving some money. And if you have already given to this or given to my fundraiser last year, thank you so much, and I appreciate all the support and all the money we've raised so far. So before we get into how Dune was right about AI and why Dune was right about AI, I want to talk about some recent horror stories in terms of the direction our society is headed. So I had many examples to use about why AI is bad. I had like this AI victim of manslaughter who was talking to a court based on a script that his sister wrote. But I don't think it's as relevant to this, but I do want to talk about this recent viral article about university students increasingly using AI, because I think some of the quotes coming out of this article literally fit in so well with the themes of Dune. And An article in New York Mag by James D. Walsh, Everyone is Cheating Their Way Through College. ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project. Now, this is a story that everyone has heard about. Students getting ChatGPT or other similar software to actually write their essays. And my sister is currently finishing her final year in university. And I'm just glad she's finishing uni. Like, she didn't start it when this thing was rife, because then you just be worried about how people could be influenced if every single person you know is using ChatGPT to write their essays. And sadly, what university has become in a lot of Western countries, you don't go there seeking knowledge or seeking to better yourself. You go there just seeking the certificate. You're essentially paying that money because you need that certificate to get a job. And for a lot of us in the UK who want to get like a better career job, but it's going to be like not in a specific field, you really just go to university to get that certificate, to get a better job, right? A lot of employers, they don't really give a shit what your degree is in. You just need a degree, right? That is an annoying thing about the university industrial complex. But I went to university genuinely because I loved history and I loved politics and I wanted to learn about it. And you feel like most people should go to university because they love the subject or they want to pursue a career in that field. Ideally, that is why people go to university. But I 100% know plenty of people that I went to university with would have used ChatGPT if it was around back then. I know people, because my first university didn't have strict regulations on attendance. I know people who never showed up to lectures and just wrote essays. So you're telling me people like that wouldn't use AI? Like, they won't even engage in the course and just hand in like 2 essays and do the exam, right? They wouldn't use AI? Of course they would. Loads of students are fundamentally fucking lazy because in a place like the UK, where your student loans don't have to be paid off in the same way like the American system, people just go to university for fun as well. Like, they go and they mainly care about the social side rather than anything else. And you're not crippled with debt afterwards, despite having student loans. They're not harassing you to pay them back. It's just taken off your income. And if you don't make a certain amount, they don't even take it out of your income. But with all that in mind, this article is really dystopian. So I'm going to read it to you and show you how people are now relying on AI to do stuff that humans should just do because it enriches your life. Like, engaging with a subject at university, I think, is a great experience, especially if you love it. You'll never get that time again in your life where you can just dedicate your whole life to this subject in this nice environment with people who are interested in it as well. And you get to challenge your own ideas, your own politics. You get to learn from very, very smart people. You have all these amazing resources. And why would you want AI to have any part in any of that? So this article saying, in January 2023, just 2 months after OpenAI launched ChatGPT, a survey of 1,000 college students found that nearly 90% of them had used the chatbot to help with homework. In the first year of its existence, the total monthly visits steadily increased month over month. Professors and teaching assistants increasingly found themselves staring at essays filled with clunky, robotic phrasing that, though grammatically flawless, didn't quite sound like a college student or even a human. So teachers have tried AI proofing assignments. Brian Patrick Green, a tech ethics scholar at Santa Clara University, immediately has stopped assigning essays after he tried ChatGPT for the first time. Less than 3 months later, teaching a course called Ethics and Artificial Intelligence, he figured a low-stakes reading reflection would be safe. Surely no one would dare use ChatGPT to write something personal. But one of his students turned in a reflection with robotic language and awkward phrasing that Green knew was AI generated. A philosophy professor across the country at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock caught students in her ethics and tech class using AI to respond to the prompt, briefly introduce yourself and say what you're hoping to get out of this class. Roy Jollymore, a poet, philosopher, and Cal State Chico ethics professor, says massive numbers of students are going to emerge from university with degrees and into the workforce who are essentially illiterate, both in the literal sense and in the sense of being historically illiterate and having no knowledge of their own culture, much less anyone else's. And Green from earlier saying, we're talking about an entire generation of learning, perhaps significantly undermined here. It's short-circuiting the learning process and it's happening fast. So there's a little part with one other student I want to read in a sec, but yeah, like, all these students have this tool available to them which they can use. And again, because of how we've devalued university and people just go there to get the certificate, but also because of just like general laziness and people not wanting to think for themselves, they're relying on AI to do the most menial tasks to them, like write an introduction about yourself. And I feel like this just goes generally, not just with AI, with social media culture, and just how everything is seen as like a waste of time. Like our brains have become so rotted by everything to do with social media. The thought of even sitting down for 30 minutes and typing out an introduction about yourself and why you want to attend a university lecture, that's too long. I can't focus for that long and write that out, can I? I feel like we're just living in this nightmare dystopia that is designed to make humans like so much dumber. And that's why I sympathize with the sentiment of we need a Butlerian Jihad, because what does this AI in this context do to help anyone? It makes your life easier for what? AI should make our lives easier to, like, I don't know, do my washing up, do my laundry or some shit like that. It shouldn't be around just to live your life for you, to like actually do stuff you should be doing and is actually good for you. Why the fuck are these people going to university in the first place? University is going to become essentially pointless for the individual if this is the way it's going. And now, one more little bit for the article. Once the chatbot had outlined Wendy's essay, providing her with a list of topic sentences and bullet points of ideas, all she had to do was fill it in. Wendy delivered a tidy 5-page paper at an acceptable tardy 10:17 a.m. When I asked her how she did on the assignment, she said she got a good grade. I really like writing, she said, sounding strangely nostalgic for her high school English class. The last time she wrote an essay unassisted. Honestly, I think there's a beauty in trying to plan your essay. You learn a lot. You have to think, oh, what can I write in this paragraph? Or what should my thesis be? But she'd rather get good grades. An essay with ChatGPT, it's like it gives you straight up what you have to follow. You just don't really have to think that much. I asked Wendy if I could read the paper she turned in, and when I opened the document, I was surprised to see the topic. The philosophy of education, pioneered by Paulo Freire. The philosophy examines the influence of social and political forces on learning and classroom dynamics. Her opening line, to what extent is schooling hindering students' cognitive abilities to think critically? Later, I asked Wendy if she recognised the irony in using AI to write this, but one that argues learning is what makes us truly human. She wasn't sure what to make of the question. I use AI a lot, like every day, and I do believe it could take away the critical thinking part, but it's just now that we rely on it, we can't really imagine living without it. And that is the bit that set everyone off writing like Butlerian Jihad now. Like humans are literally replacing their critical thinking skills with robots now just because they're lazy. Like they don't even want to fail. And I do get, and I have sympathy for university just being a pathway to get a better job, and that's why capitalism essentially ruins everything. At the same time, universities are still worth going to do a degree in something you're passionate about, especially if you're doing a humanities degree and you're using AI. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Seriously, like, who is doing a humanities degree only to get a better job? Like, no one is doing that. I did a humanities degree. So the thought of them writing an essay about critical thinking skills in education and using AI to completely do it is just the most dystopian shit. And in some ways, I blame this person because they're like, I can't imagine a life without it. But when you have something like that so available, I guess it just is that temptation. And with the university industrial complex as well, are they going to really care at a certain point? They just want the money. They don't really give a shit about your personal education and getting these critical thinking skills and writing skills. But yeah, the fact someone's doing English and doesn't want to write their own paper just shows what state we're at with AI. And I'm not a complete AI hater, despite the fact this video is going to be largely agreeing with Dune's view on AI in a lot of capacities. I think there should be a ban on AI recreationally. It's a Pandora's box that's been opened now, sadly, but I don't think your average person should be able to use AI in terms of using ChatGPT to write stuff or using AI video editing software, because we know what people do with stuff like that. I just think the public should not have access to this. I think it should be limited and regulated to certain professional fields, things like medicine, and I think it should also be regulated in things like education, right? Like people doing actual like academic research, archival stuff. AI is perfectly fine to use in that respect, but humans all have an access to these image generators, things that can write us whatever that we want. It's just totally bad for society, and I would support a complete destruction of recreational AI. And all your arguments to me that we shouldn't ban recreational AI, like, oh, I like doing this with it, I like doing that with it, it's not worth the cost. You personally liking it or it making your life a little bit easier in some regards is not worth the cost of what it's doing to humanity. And we always had this vision, which is interesting, and it actually contrasts for two Dune styles together. We had this vision that AI would be what the Butlers fought against in the Dune prequel books, right? That it would be Skynet. It would be this sentient intelligence like Ultron destroying humanity because it's reached this like level of enlightenment where it says, well, humans, you're bad, you're all gone, right? But it's much closer to Dune, where you could imagine some more like fanatical, even like religious pushback to what AI is doing to actual humanity and people's humanity, rather than like some existential threat to the human civilization. So I never said this video is going to be short, but now let's talk about Dune. So if you were just here for some AI coverage, you might want to tune out now. And we are going to be reading some passages from the original Dune, Children of Dune, and the God Emperor of Dune. But basically, in the original Dune, the Butlerian Jihad is something vague. Like I said, in the prequels, which I don't consider canon, it was made into this Skynet thing. It's vague. And actually, the only real insight we get into what that period would have been like is Leto Atreides II, when accessing his other memories, which are the memories of his ancestors, like Paul Atreides can do as well, he sees what that period was like very, very briefly. But the Butlerian Jihad basically informs the whole world of Dune. It's something that happens 10,000 years before the events of the first Dune movie, and it's why the world of Dune is so stagnant. It's why we have these people who essentially have supernatural abilities, whether that be Mentats, the Bene Gesserit, or the Spacing Guild. They all have these different qualities because humanity has replaced computers in many ways. So the Spacing Guild, for example, where we don't get a good insight into them in the movies, a Space Guild navigator is like submerged in a tank of spice, so it can kind of see the future to help guide these ships through space to their destinations, right? That's what they use instead of like some sort of computer navigational system. Where the Bene Gesserit access through spice other memory, which is their ancestors' memories, and it just helps their pursuit of power, it helps their pursuit of molding humanity and helping humanity's survival, where then you have a group like Mentats, who essentially are like human computers and human AIs, and they're trained in different Mentat schools to achieve this. So that's what happens in Dune after the ban of AI. You have all these factions forming to serve the purpose, but it has the human limitation, and it can't be propagated like AI is. But let's talk about how the Butlerian Jihad is actually spoke about in Dune itself before we get into Frank Herbert's own words on things like technology. And he actually coined a really nice phrase in his interviews. He called it tech-peasantry, where you're more deliberate about your use of technology. And I think it's a very nice contrast with the term we've been hearing a lot lately, Techno-feudalism, where essentially we are enslaved for the benefit of these tech kings through technology, and they are enslaving us with things like AI, and like that university student said, can't even imagine my life without it. That's great for people like Sam Altman, not so great for the rest of the world. So in the original Dune, this is basically the first reference to the Butlerian Jihad, and anyone who's watched any Dune movie, the 1984 one or the 2021 version, it's a scene where Paul puts his hand in the box in front of the Reverend Mother. So I'm going to read you the passage. Paul looked down at the hand that had known pain, then up to the Reverend Mother. The sound of her voice had contained a difference then from any other voice in his experience. The words were outlined in brilliance. There was an edge to them, but he felt that any question he might ask her would bring an answer that could lift him out of his flesh world into something greater. Why do you test for humans, he asked. To set you free. Free? Once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. And just stopping there quick, I like that quote because it literally sums up that university student in many ways. And then we get the very famous line, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a man's mind," Paul quoted. Right out of the Butlerian Jihad and the Orange Catholic Bible, she said. But what the OC Bible should have said is, "Thou shalt not make a machine to counterfeit a human mind." Have you studied the Mentat in your service? I've studied with Thufir Hawat, the Reverend Mother saying, the Great Revolt took away a crutch. It forced human minds to develop. Schools were started to train human talents. Bene Gesserit schools, Paul asked. She nodded. We have two chief survivors of those ancient schools, the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild. The Guild, so we think, emphasises almost pure mathematics. The Bene Gesserit perform another function. Politics, Paul said. So like I was outlining for you, that is the law of Dune, and that is the first reference to the Butlerian Jihad. And already there we're seeing some things we kind of agree with. Basically, in Frank Herbert's mind and in the Dune world's mind, technology was a hindrance to humanity and it stopped the development of humanity. We relied far too much on technology, and it's good to reject it, but also in some ways that put humanity into a period of stagnation. At the end of the Dune book, it has like loads of lore you can read that isn't relevant to the actual narrative, but it says here, "Then came the Butlerian Jihad, 2 generations of chaos. The god of machine logic was overthrown among the masses, and a new concept was raised. Man may not be replaced. Those 2 generations of violence were a cause for all humankind. Men looked at their gods and their rituals and saw that both were filled with the most terrible of all equations, fear over ambition. Hesitantly, the leaders of religions, whose followers had spilled the blood of billions, began meeting to exchange views. It was a move encouraged by the Spacing Guild, which was beginning to build its monopoly over all interstellar travel, and by the Bene Gesserit, who abandoned the sorceresses." So if you read the lore at the end of the first Dune book, what the Butlerian Jihad appears to be is like a culmination of this like religious fervor, and basically what happens afterwards is a lot of the religion is simplified. So you just have the Orange Catholic Bible as the dominant Christian religion. Then you have Zen Sunni and Zen Sufi religious beliefs, which are a combination of what it sounds like Zen Buddhism with Sufi Islam or Sunni Islam. So the way it's characterized in the Frank Herbert books makes it seem like some sort of religious crusade, which you can get from the term jihad, right? This holy war, this struggle against the machines, where the Brian Herbert ones makes it seem like a more clear-cut heroes versus the machine story. Now, Children of Dune is the 3rd book, and this is where we actually get a little insight into what it might have been like in the Butlerian Jihad period, and that is with, little spoiler here, Paul Atreides' son, Leto II, as he is accessing other memory. So this is in relation to him accessing these memories. So, past and present tumbled through him, surging across the barriers of his terror. He could not separate them. One moment he felt himself setting forth on the Butlerian Jihad, eager to destroy any machine which simulated human awareness. That had to be the past, over and done with. Yet his senses hurtled through the experience, absorbing the more minute details. He heard a minister companion speaking from a pulpit. "We must negate the machines that think. Humans must set their own guidelines. This is not something machines can do. Reasoning depends on programming, not on hardware, and we are the ultimate program." He heard the voice clearly, knew his surroundings, a vast wooden hall with dark windows. Light came from spluttering flames, and his minister companion said, "Our jihad is a dump program. We dump the things which destroy us as humans." So yeah, like I was saying, it's like very clear from these books that the Butlerian Jihad has some sort of religious fervor behind it about what it means to be human. And talking about like billions dying, it seems like a war between civilizations who want things like AI and civilizations who don't. And the civilizations who don't basically get their way, and this agreement that happens later between all these different factions and helps mainstream these beliefs in something like the Orange Catholic Bible, that's where it ends and the Dune world kind of starts. Now, later on in the series, the God Emperor, Leto II, is a hypocrite because he defies the Butlerian Jihad, and he actually gets the faction, the Ixians, who make technology still. He knows they break it and he buys their technology, and he says here, "The Ixians operated in the terra incognita of creative invention, which had been outlawed by the Butlerian Jihad. They made their devices in the image of the mind, the very thing which had ignited the Jihad's destruction and slaughter. That was what they did on Ix, and Leto could only let them continue. I buy from them. I could not even write my journals without their dictators to respond to my unspoken thought. Without Ix, I would not have hidden my journals and the printers. But they must be reminded of the dangers in what they do. And the guild could not be allowed to forget. That was easier. Even while guildsmen cooperated with Ix, they distrusted the Ixians mightily. If this new Ixian machine works, the guild has lost its monopoly on space travel." So I said I wasn't going to spoil Dune Messiah, but I am going to spoil some of the narratives of the later Dune books. These are set like thousands of years after the Dune movies, if that comforts you, but please tune out now if you don't want spoilers for the rest of it. So basically, the point of Dune overall is to basically warn people about authoritarian structures and bureaucracies, and it promotes a message of individualism, self-reliance, and generally libertarianism. So someone like Leto II, he starts breaking the law of the Butlerian Jihad and making technology, but his whole reign is designed to make humans scatter across the universe, basically create different societies, which will allow humanity to thrive without this centralized authority. But that also includes, increasingly as the Dune books go on, the technology becomes something that you find in general science fiction, like ships that can fly anywhere without the guild navigators, ships that can disguise themselves, more computer technology and things like that. So although the Butlerian Jihad is a part of the Dune lore, which we can read as maybe someone even saying, this could be a good idea, I think over the 6 books, it's actually a lot more nuanced in that, and that humanity is actually saved once it breaks away from the conformity around the Butlerian Jihad and the Carino and Atreides empires, right? But to get more of an insight into why Dune might have been right about AI in some ways, in that over-reliance on technology is bad for humanity's development. Relying on technology to replace like human functions is like probably not good for us long term. There was an interview by Pat Stone in 1981, and I found this on Mother Earth News, and he interviewed Frank Herbert, and I want to read you a fair bit of this. It's really interesting, and it pretty much outlines what the Dune books are about in regard to technology and things like self-reliance and libertarianism. And I think it's important to understand this when we're talking about like Dune being right about AI in some ways. Frank Herbert says, the bulk of science fiction authors, and there are some exceptions, are heavily into what I call the technological toy syndrome. Writers and scientists who believe that technology alone can solve problems have fallen into a common scientific fallacy, the belief that science can answer any question in absolute terms, that it's possible to reduce phenomena to one explanation that will operate in a vacuum. That's not the way the universe appears to me, and quite clearly didn't appear to Albert Einstein or Heisenberg either. The interviewer saying, what other factors do you think will influence the decentralization of society? Herbert saying, we've opened the Pandora's box of violent technology. We're fast approaching a time where one person can make and employ instruments of violence equal to the ones formerly reserved only to massive governments. Let's face it, our society has a tiger by the tail in technology. We can't let go. We can't all go back to the farm and be self-sufficient. There isn't enough land to do so, for one thing. Furthermore, people's expectations for their lifestyles have been raised, and you don't monkey around with human expectations. So what we need is a new way of relating to our society and its tools, and it was in an attempt to envision just such a change that 15 years ago, I coined the phrase techno-peasantry. How would you define techno-peasantry? Frank Herbert saying, it involves drawing support from technology, but doing so imaginatively. We have to ask the question, what elements of technology should I use and how should I use them? A peasant knows, you see, when and why to grab a shovel or a hoe. In the same way, we have to think out our own relationship to the complete environment, our own values and technological options, and make decisions consciously. The interviewer saying, you're saying then that techno-peasantry involves people questioning their basic assumptions so they can make intelligent decisions about how to use technology. Herbert saying, well, that's not all there is to it. There are other aspects to questioning how we use technology. For instance, most people today live in a light switch society where they have no actual connection to the tools they use. If the light goes off, they have to call the building superintendent to repair it. Knowledge has become institutionalized into specialties, and individuals have continually less and less power over their lives. We need to use technology differently so that people can understand their tools, and so they can put back in touch with the natural world. In fact, one of the things our society needs desperately is a way for people to touch the earth personally and gain the restorative strength that comes with weeding or shoveling from really getting their hands dirty. We need ways that men and women can see the direct results of their efforts. So Frank Herbert is literally telling people to go and touch grass. Not surprising for someone who did create his own home in like a very self-sufficient way, had his own garden, all that type of thing, and did firmly believe people should not be reliant on centralized authority and social programs. He hated things like Social Security and Medicare and stuff like that. And if you guys want, I will make another video talking about why Frank Herbert would have voted for Donald Trump and would support Elon Musk and Doge. but just not in the way you think. So let me know if you want that. But yeah, you can see how his rhetoric there about techno-peasantry could fit in very nicely with him supporting something like a Butlerian jihad generally, or this just total ban against things like AI. Like, as a writer, I'm sure he would be absolutely horrified at English students not even reading anything for their essays and getting an AI to write it for him. I'm sure that is a nightmare he probably couldn't have even conceived of. But it goes in with his general sentiment about people knowing how to even do things to them personally. Like, and he's totally right, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot more. How many people know how to do anything anymore? Because you have this society where technology either does it for you or other people do it for you, so you don't have to be self-reliant. But when it comes to things like using AI for anything, AI to edit videos, AI to write essays, AI to write just basically anything you want, AI to create art, all these different things, then you fundamentally, and humans will fundamentally, start losing the skills that we've always had. And you can say this in relation to humans don't know how to do certain things because we've forgotten, because we've moved away from that. And I think that's a good point to make that in terms of AI. If everything becomes so easy for us and AI starts doing everything for us, even parts which are like good parts about being human, like being creative, then we're going to fundamentally lose those skills. And also in a profit-driven world, those skills won't even be desirable, because why the fuck would giant corporations start paying people to do jobs like writing in a really good way, or like video editing, or anything creative, if an AI can do it for you for a much lower cost? So are the Dune books actually supporting a Butlerian jihad? Would Frank Herbert actually say, go out and like smash technology and we should have this revolution to ban AI? I don't even know if he would necessarily say that. But constantly moving away from the physical world and constantly moving away from being able to be self-reliant and constantly relying on computers, technology, and now AI to do everything for you, he would have been absolutely horrified by that, I'm sure. And although I wouldn't necessarily say the big point of Dune is a warning against AI, the world he envisions post-AI, it does make sense when the characters justify why it exists. It does make sense why they've done this and why they've rejected this technology and why this technology had enslaved humanity and made humans increasingly irrelevant as they relied on this technology. And right now, if you say to most people, we need some sort of Butlerian jihad law on AI, I think a lot of people would support that. If, like me, you're pushing like ban recreational AI, ban ChatGPT being able to be accessed on the App Store, ban these AI things like Grok and these image generators and these video editors, ban them from the public. Frank Herbert wouldn't actually support that because he hated the government, but I think a lot of people would support that. And I think if you wanted, you can easily, especially in light of all this AI takeover, you can read the Butlerian jihad in Dune in a very, very positive way. And it's pretty clear we'd have a lot of agreements with Frank Herbert, especially with his ideology of techno-peasantry, as opposed to things like Technofeudalism, because I guess the main warning with Dune, if we're taking its political message in with its AI message, is powerful figures are using technology to enslave us. And they're using things like AI as a trick where, well, it'll make your life easier in regards to writing a university essay. It will edit your videos quicker, but oh, you're handing over all your skills. You're handing over all your privacy. You're handing over everything to these giant tech companies to enslave us forever. And they're allowing all of them to have this monopoly over our lives, which is the thing that causes like the Butlerian jihad in the first place in the world of Doom. So a long one today, a fun one to make. Let me know what you guys think about AI and the Butlerian jihad. What do you actually think about the differences between Frank and Brian Herbert's interpretation of the Butlerian jihad? And yeah, I love making videos like this, so please support it if you want to see more. And let me know if you want that Elon Musk, Frank Herbert video. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.